So welcome everyone. This is our second class in the Tathagata Essence, this subject of the basic program. Let me go ahead and start by putting prayers on the screen that we'll do together, and then we'll do a short meditation. I think tonight, last time we did this 3 times, the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, but I think tonight we'll just do it once, and I think going forward, we'll just do this once, and then the refuge prayer as well as the mandala offering. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. In the mandala offering, this ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon, I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then refuge in bodhicitta. As usual, we'll do this the first time in English, and then we'll do twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened. To the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kapsuchi daki chanyen gipe sonam gi dola penchir sangye druparsho sangye chodang soki choknam la Jangchu bardu dakni kyabsuchi daki chanyen gipe sonam gi dola penshir sangye druparsho. All right, let's do a short meditation. We'll just start with a few minutes of watching the breath in order to calm our minds a bit, let go of whatever distractions we might have. And then I'll lead you in setting motivation. So we'll go ahead and begin now with watching the breath. So now let's set our motivation by reflecting on what I went through last week in a very brief way. The topic of Buddha nature or Tathagata essence. Recall that we have two aspects to Buddha nature. The one that we're working with right now as we turn our minds towards the teachings with the motivation of bodhicitta is our developmental or transforming Buddha nature. This is the continuity of our minds that has been there since beginningless time that we can change. We can introduce positive thoughts such as bodhicitta. We can eliminate all of our negative tendencies, ignorance, and all the delusions built upon that ignorance. We can develop amazing qualities within our minds. Our minds can change. And the fact that our minds can change is rooted in the naturally abiding Buddha nature. The fact that our minds have been free of any inherent contamination or stains since beginningless time as well. While we do currently have those stains, while we do have all of the factors that have led us to be unenlightened, because the mind is empty of inherent existence, because the delusions don't exist inherently, we therefore can change our minds. These two concepts together, our developmental Buddha nature as well as our naturally abiding Buddha nature, give us great conviction that, first of all, we ourselves can become a Buddha. Without a doubt, we can engage in the teachings the Buddha gave to purify our minds, to enhance our qualities, because our minds are empty of inherent existence. So attaining the goal of our own enlightenment is completely possible. We have Buddha nature. But moreover, all sentient beings possess Buddha nature. Just by virtue of having a mind, they have both of those elements. The ability to transform that through practicing the Buddha's teachings and the emptiness of the mind that allows for that to happen. Therefore, we can also be fully dedicated to the welfare of all sentient beings. These two thoughts together constitute bodhicitta, the wish to become a Buddha, so we can then help all others to do the same. So bring this motivation into your heart right now. In this way, we are creating another cause for our eventual enlightenment and also for the enlightenment of all beings. Okay, I thought I would start with just checking in on last week. I think all of you hopefully have had a chance to access the materials and take a look at what we went through. Just know that again, I am every week going to be adding more materials. Venerable Dundrup was very kind in getting these all up on the Dropbox and what have you. So I encourage you to take a look. At least I generally try to get them to him on Wednesday night, the materials for the Thursday night class, so you can access them all day Thursday and have those in front of you if you'd like to on your device if you want to use that, or print them out, whatever you prefer. So were there any questions from last week? I know we had discussion after the class and at the end of the class, and I answered some questions, but I'm curious if there are any questions from the folks on Zoom or in the Gompa here. If you're on Zoom, if you could click your little hands up thing on the reactions, that way I know to check the screen and see that. So anyone have any questions? Okay. So again, as I said in the meditation tonight, the main topic that I talked about after introducing basic program and kind of this text in a very general way, I went through the story of a Sangha and Maitreya, so you have an understanding of where this text came from. And then we began looking at the topic of Buddha nature. So I'm not going to review that because this is what we're going to be talking about this whole course, is Buddha nature. and these two elements of Buddha nature. So what I'd like to do to get things going, I didn't get a chance to talk about or kind of introduce what are called the 7 vajra topics, or diamond topics, diamond points, whatever they're called in different translations. So I want to introduce that to you by putting the chart on screen. This chart was available in last week's materials. Let's see if I can find where I have that. There it is. It's on the screen now. The entirety of this text, the Uttara Tantra, the Sublime Continuum of Maitreya, constitutes these 7 vajra points. This is the outline, in a sense, of what the entire text is. Recall from last week, though, that we're only going to be discussing chapter 1 of this text. Chapter 1 covers the first 4 vajra points, but I'll be introducing you to all 7 of them tonight. So let me just go through the enumeration of these vajra points first. That's the second column. The first 3 are what we often call the 3 jewels, or Rinpoche's translation is the 3 rare sublime ones. In this context, though, we are primarily looking at them, as it says in the left-hand column, as the resultant 3 jewels that will be achieved by oneself. This is the ultimate goal that one wants to achieve on the Mahayana. This is a particular presentation to Mahayana in terms of how these are being set out. We have in general a way of presenting the 3 jewels that's going to be a little bit different that we won't be looking at as part of this course. But know that when you look at Lam Rim text, for example, you might see some differences in how these 3 jewels are set out. Because what we're talking about here is our own desire to become the 3 jewels, especially the Buddha jewel, which encompasses all the other qualities, the Dharma jewel, which is having full cessations and paths actualized within our continuum, and then the Sangha jewel, to be able to appear in forms to benefit other beings, to be able to lead them on the path. So essentially, these are the ways in which the 3 jewels can be seen in this context, is as the result that we want to accomplish. And this is always the goal of, again, of our Mahayana practice, as we just meditated on when we looked at bodhicitta. We want to become a Buddha. We want to actualize the 3 jewels in our own mental continuum. Now, the rest of it, in terms of the presentation, are the causes that will allow you to accomplish that. The substantial cause, as it says there, that will bring about one's achievement, the basis for you to achieve the desired goal of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, is Buddha nature. What is called here the basic element. Again, I mentioned some synonyms for it. You could call it the Tathagata essence, you can call it Buddha lineage, different terms for it. We're going to generally refer to it simply as Buddha nature. But this, again, is what will allow you to become a Buddha. It's the raw stuff in terms of those 2 aspects, one side being our mind that can be developed fully into that state, the other side being the emptiness of the mind that allows for that to happen. These 2 together become the causes for that. Now, technically, emptiness isn't a cause. We'll see that being even put out in the text, because emptiness is a permanent phenomenon, an unchanging phenomenon. So therefore, it cannot be a cause of anything, because causes are only in the impermanent realm. But nonetheless, it's kind of part of the ground upon which Buddhahood will develop. The last 3 topics of these 7 are the remaining 3 chapters of Uttara Tantra. Chapter 4 is on the topic, chapter 2 is on the topic of enlightenment, the 5th topic there. Chapter 3 is on the qualities. Chapter 4 is on the activities. So in this context, even though enlightenment is repeated here, because we just saw the Buddha jewel as part of what we're striving to achieve, even though it's repeated here, it's meant to be those beings who have already attained enlightenment, who act as cooperative conditions for us to be able to accomplish that goal ourselves. And then, of course, the qualities that they possess, the activities that they engage in, the other 2 of these vajra points. So as it says there in that left-hand column, these are the cooperative causes or conditions, we sometimes use that word, or, again, empowering conditions that will help one achieve the desired result. The cooperative conditions that help one to achieve the desired goal of Buddhahood. Okay? So essentially what we're talking about in this text is the 4th topic that we saw, again, that's part of the first chapter still, is Buddha nature. That's firmly in the center as the substantial cause for you to become the 3 jewels. But obviously, you don't do that completely on your own. You do that through the aid and benefit of other beings who have attained enlightenment. And this is, again, in particular with the Mahayana context. In the general presentation of refuge, we often look at other aspects of the three jewels that help us on our path as well. But nonetheless, this is the kind of bottom line with regard to the Mahayana. What I want to do very briefly, because we're going to see this repeated in the text tonight, is just take a look at how these are set out in terms of ultimate and conventional. What do we mean by ultimate and conventional? By ultimate, we mean kind of what will you end up relying upon at the deepest level, versus conventional, what will you rely upon in a more temporary way? So for the Buddha jewel, the ultimate is essentially the Dharmakaya of the Buddha, though it's described here. These are actually taken from teachings by Geshe uh, uh, Tupten Choni. He's the Geshe who's the um, abbot at Kopan Monastery currently. He says it's an individual who has completely abandoned all negativities and has achieved the excellent qualities and all knowledge. In essence, it's the Dharmakaya of the Buddha. So when we talk about somebody who has become the Buddha jewel, they have done those two things. You take it off screen for a moment and get worried about people at home in particular, just having to see that screen the whole time. But when we talk about Buddhahood, we just said this word in the refuge prayer, right, of Sangye. Most of you know this. The two words Sang and Ye were what the Tibetans used to come up with a term that encapsulates what we mean by Buddha. Buddha, in terms of Sanskrit, means someone who is fully awakened, who has fully developed their minds in that regard. But they divided it into two pieces. Sang means to completely purify, completely remove all the obscurations in the mind. Gye means to fully develop all the qualities. I think I have that right. I haven't said it in a while, so I'm sure I've got if I have the order mixed up, then I'll check it out and make sure I get it correct. So Sang, again, completely purified, Ye, fully developed. That's what we're talking about in terms of what a Buddha is a being who has taken that task to hand and has actually done the work and accomplished that goal. So that's what we mean by an ultimate Buddha jewel. What do we mean by a conventional Buddha jewel? Put this back on the screen. We essentially mean the form bodies of a Buddha. I went through these bodies of a Buddha last week. Essentially, when you become a Buddha, when your mind develops into the state of Dharmakaya, that very instant, you have form bodies appearing spontaneously for the welfare of beings. You don't even have to think about it. They just instantly appear due to the karma of those beings and the connection that you have with them. So essentially, the way that Buddhas are manifesting in our world to help us in a more temporal way are through these form bodies or rupakaya. Again, we talked about last week how they can be divided into two. I won't go into more detail on that at this stage of the game, but we do have what's called the Sambhogakaya, enjoyment body, or the Nirmanakaya, the emanation body. Now, when we talk about the Dharma jewel is essentially two things: true cessations and true paths. True paths are those direct realizations of emptiness that produce a true cessation. They whittle away at the obscurations in the mind. So what do we mean by an ultimate Dharma jewel? We mean those actual occurrences within the continuum, the mind of a Mahayana superior being, or Arya. Most of you know this term, Arya. Arya essentially means someone who has directly realized emptiness. They've had that profound, deep experience that causes them to begin the process of removing these layers of obscurations. So this can be anyone who's a bodhisattva who has begun that process with their very first direct realization of emptiness and has produced that true path that then induces a true cessation of some level of obscuration, or it can be all the way up through a Buddha, who has done that full work. In terms of the conventional, though, what we need on a temporal basis is we need to relate to these teachings in a more manifest way, right? Because as unenlightened sentient beings, the realizations in the mind of a Buddha don't do much for us, right? We can't access them. We can't know them. The Buddha can't plant them in our own minds. The Buddha can only teach the Dharma that gives us the opportunity to create those for ourselves. So the teachings of the Buddha, such as the 12 categories of the great scriptures, the commentaries on the teachings we're looking at in this very class, these are all the Dharma jewel, but the Dharma jewel in a conventional way. They're not an ultimate, kind of deeper object of refuge, though we obviously need them as a bridge or a boat. It's often used the term of a boat, the Dharma boat that gets us to the other shore. We absolutely need that. But the real refuge, the ultimate refuge, are the true cessations and true paths in the minds of any of these Mahayana beings. The Sangha jewel is also, in essence, the ultimate Sangha jewel, the true cessations and true paths in those minds of those beings as well. Because that's what we're relying upon. We know we use the term Sangha very loosely in Buddhism to refer to those who we are in community with. We might call the community here at Thupta Norberling a Sangha. That's really a very loose usage of that. When we talk about the Sangha jewel, we want to be able to rely upon beings who have greater depth of knowledge than perhaps what we possess in this room. I'm not putting down your knowledge, but if we don't have a direct realization of emptiness, it's very hard to be able to communicate that to others. So essentially what we mean by the Sangha jewel are the realizations, the true paths, and then of course the true cessations that have occurred on the basis of that. That's what we're really relying upon. But of course, we need Sangha jewels in our in physical form that we can relate to. In our general presentation of the Sangha jewel, we might include any Aryas, any beings who have that realization. But in this Mahayana presentation, we're only going to talk about Arya Bodhisattvas being the conventional jewels. Why? Because we want to rely upon those as our Sangha in order to achieve the Mahayana path. And it's not discounting the realizations that those on what we call the fundamental vehicle, the Hinayana. It's not discounting those realizations. Those are also realizations of emptiness. But we're primarily relying upon bodhisattvas, Mahayana practitioners here. And when it comes to the basic element, the fourth topic, Buddha nature, which again, we're going to be going into in more detail. We already talked about this last week. These aren't the exact definitions I gave last week. But the emptiness of sentient beings' minds, which possess defilements and stains, is the naturally abiding lineage. It is actually the ultimate Buddha nature. Why? Because that emptiness is what we need to realize, as well as the foundation upon which all of the changes in the mind can occur. Whereas the conventional Buddha nature in the far column is the power or energy in the minds of sentient beings, which has the ability to develop transcendental knowledge. Again, that's the conventional one we need to work with. We need to have that in our lives and continue to on that process. But without the ultimate Buddha nature of the emptiness of the mind, none of that could happen. None of that could occur. Then when we talk about the next three, I'm going to go through these again very quickly. The state of Dharmakaya, meaning the wisdom mind of the Buddha, is our ultimate enlightenment that we would be relying upon. Those beings, again, who have that wisdom of a Buddha. And then the form bodies that they appear in, such as the supreme emanation body that the Buddha was, as well as the emanation bodies that are perhaps in our world in the form of beings like His Holiness the Dalai Lama and so on. Then we need, of course, the qualities that those beings possess as enlightened beings, which are at an ultimate level, what are called here the 32 qualities of the Buddha. I won't go into the whole litany of all of these, the 10 powers, the 4 perfect knowledges, the 18 unshared qualities. If you've studied chapter 4 of the Ornament, which is a basic program text, then you've gone into those in more depth. Again, won't be talking about them tonight. But these are kind of the qualities that reside within that being that make them a reliable guide for us. And then, of course, the qualities that are manifest to us are what are called the 32 major marks of the Buddha. And a whole list of these various things that Buddhas, when they have fully developed their minds, demonstrate in their physical qualities, such as what we see in a statue of the Buddha, the Ushnisha, the crown protrusion, and so on. These are all parts of these 32 major marks. And then if they are enlightened and they have all these qualities, it doesn't help us unless they engage in activities. They have to engage in activities that are rooted in the wisdom truth body, the Dharmakaya, the Jnana Dharmakaya. But then, of course, they have to teach the Dharma. They have the collection of the teachings of the Buddha, again, such as the 12 categories of scriptures. This is what Buddhas do to enlighten beings. You know, they can't enlighten beings without teaching them the Dharma. So essentially, these are, once more, these last three are all the things that we depend upon as cooperative conditions to be able to actualize our Buddha nature and become a Buddha. Become the Buddha jewel, which encompasses the Dharma jewel and the Sangha jewel, and accomplish the what we're setting out to do on the Mahayana path. Okay, so Yeah, and that's a little introduction. I didn't realize there was actually okay. This is just, I was just checking what was in the chat box. It looks like I don't need to pay too much attention to that. Again, if you do find that you have a question as we're going through things and you're online, feel free to put it in the chat box and I'll try to attend to that and answer those questions. All right, so that's just a very brief introduction to what this entire text is about. As I said, we're going to cover the first 3 topics over the next, like tonight and next week. I hope to cover all of those. We're not going to spend as much time on them because the 4th topic is the main topic of this course. Buddha nature, gaining an appreciation for that, having a deeper understanding of what it is so that we have greater confidence in our ability to become Buddhas ourselves. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is introduce you to the text. I do have, actually, maybe I'll pop back to the slides. That's probably not a bad idea because I just went through all of that just so that, well, actually, I didn't open the slides. Sorry. I was preparing for things ahead of time when I came in tonight, but I didn't do that. Let me get this on screen here. Okay. So again, I'm not going to have a whole lot of slides for some of these classes because once we get into the commentary, then we're really just going to be kind of moving through the material that way. But whenever there's some additional material that I need to kind of introduce you to, then I will have some slides. And again, there are PDFs of the slides I'm presenting in your materials folders. Okay, so let me go forward. This is what I went through last week. Okay. So the last topic, again, that I didn't get through last week was this 7 vajra topics that I just went through. And so I'm repeating those slides from last week. And essentially, again, we have the list there. I want to just briefly say a little bit about why they're called vajra. Sometimes this word vajra is translated as diamond, sometimes even as thunderbolt. I found it interesting in the recent book by His Holiness and Venerable Children. They call it thunderbolt. But these are quotes from 2 Kagyu lamas that there are texts of their teachings on this. Again, I'm not going to be using them a lot because it's a slightly different presentation. But Khenchen Tranggu Rinpoche, who actually just passed away recently, he said the work is composed of 7 points called indestructible or vajra points because they are very profound like a vajra. And these topics we've just looked at are kind of the essence, the very heart of what Buddhahood and becoming a Buddha is all about. Jamgon Kontrol Lodre Taye says, the term vajra is used since a precious vajra is composed of indestructible material. This is why sometimes diamonds are used as a translation, because a diamond will be able to cut through other minerals and things. It maintains its nature in the midst of all that. And the subject to be expressed, he says, is difficult to penetrate by means of the discriminative wisdoms resulting from study and meditation. That's not to scare you away again, but just to know that we're heading into some pretty profound topics of the Mahayana. So again, I've already done this, taken a look at those, so I don't think I need to do much more on that. This is just a recap of the chapters once more, which I already mentioned. So know that all of that is in your slides if you want to refer to that at a later point. Let's go to the text. Now, in terms of this text, this is again a text that is used for going through this text by Maitreya. This is a commentary by a Tibetan Gyaltsab Dharma Rinchen, or often called Gyaltsab Je. I mentioned last week that he is one of the 2 heart disciples of Je Tsongkhapa, who's the founder of the Geluk tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. So I want to just go over the contents in a very brief way so you have some idea of what all is going to be covered in this first chapter. This is, whoops, somehow I got it off of my thing. How did I do that? Let me go back to there. No, something else came up on mine. I'm going to stop the share just so I can get it back up on my screen. Zoom. Let's see here. Okay. Oops, that's not it. Try again. There it is. Okay. Okay. So chapter 1, now what's weird is on this commentary, it's all on chapter 1 of the text by Maitreya, but it itself has its own chapters, so don't get confused by this. But essentially, all of what we're looking at is in a number of chapters, but it's all commentary on chapter 1 of Maitreya's text, which it consists of 168 verses. We're going to go through tonight the introductory section, hopefully get through the first chapter there, an overview of the body of the text, and I'm hoping to even get into the Buddha jewel, which is the first of the 3 jewels presented. So you'll see that we do have a number of pages related to this. I'm not going to cover many of the pages, and that's because it gets off into some debates and things and becomes very complicated very quickly. And I don't think we want to waste our mental energy on that when we want to get on to the topic of Buddha nature. So I've already kind of edited what we're looking at tonight. Chapter 3 is a very brief little introduction to the causes and conditions for attaining these 3 resultant jewels. It kind of goes over a bit of what I talked about already, the substantial cause of Buddha nature, and then the cooperative conditions. Then we go right into an explanation of that 4th topic, the basic element, Buddha nature. That will be the main topic for the remainder of the text. And you'll see that this chapter 5 is a large one from page 93 all the way up to page 169. This is what's called the 10 presentations. This is, again, a very detailed presentation of various aspects of Buddha nature. It's very rich, and it has a lot of wonderful metaphors in it that are kind of useful for getting an appreciation for these various aspects of Buddha nature. Then we have chapter 6, the 9 similes, which is also a fairly large portion of this text. These are these beautiful similes for what Buddha nature is like, as well as how we are obscured to our Buddha nature. This is a very kind of real poetic part of the text, if you ask me. And then the last several chapters are where we just kind of go more into looking at the consciousness that perceives this Buddha nature, identifying the nature of it, the purpose in teaching this, which we talked about a little bit last week, but essentially it'll be, Gyaltsabje's own presentation on that. All right? Let's go forward. And what we're going to do for tonight is I'm going to read some of this without a lot of commentary. I think it is kind of auspicious to read Gyaltsabje's initial verses, even though I won't be commenting much on them. These are kind of a nice way to begin our study of this and to, in a way, be grateful to Gyaltsabje and others who've come before him and after him who have helped us to understand this text. I prostrate to the venerable gurus, those who clarified with flawless logic the sage's teachings, the precious lamp, in the manner of burning, cutting, and rubbing to purify gold. This is what they often use as the analogy for our job as people approaching the Dharma, just like someone who's being given something that they don't know whether it's gold or not. They're a goldsmith. They actually go through the process of testing it, burning it, cutting it, rubbing it to make sure that it is gold. We have that same obligation in regard to the teachings. I prostrate at the feet of the noble spiritual friends, the supreme beings who commented on the intention of the scriptures, eliminating all faults through their keen intelligence. They completed the qualities of realization and abandonment. Their famous radiance illuminates the 3 realms, and with glorious great compassion, they see all beings as their children. I prostrate to the unconquerable Bodhisattva Maitreya, the one conferred regent of the Lord of Sages, that's the Buddha, supreme guide of the gods, and to the embodiment of the wisdom of all the victors, the Bodhisattva Manjushri. Remember, Manjushri and Maitreya appeared in the retinue of the Buddha as bodhisattvas. They are said to be both fully enlightened beings. Predicted by the Buddha in the scriptures to exhaustively comment on the final intention of the definitive and interpretable sutras. We're going to talk about this a little bit tonight. We touched on it briefly last week. Some teachings are said to be definitive. We can rely upon them in a very literal and direct way. Others need to be interpreted on the basis of various criteria. A Sangha, renowned throughout the 3 realms, completely clarified the great treatises. Yet, those who were not able to differentiate one's own and others' tenets with obstinacy engaged in guesswork, degenerated this great charioteer's tradition by asserting other positions as the true intent of the sage. Again, we talked a little bit about a Sangha last week as being kind of the charioteer, the one who set the track of what's known as Chitta Matra, the mind-only school, which is not said to be the final word of the Buddha, but it is not to be denigrated because it is taught by the Buddha as a stepping stone for those to get, who need that to get to the final view, the middle way view, the Madhyamika view. Move it up a little bit. The intention of the scriptures is extremely difficult to realize, and the faults of teaching the Dharma erroneously heavy. If it is tremendously difficult to find a noble spiritual friend, the intelligent should behave with caution. In other words, you don't want to turn away from something when that might actually be exactly what we need. So I will explain in the way of the Venerable Gurus the integral meaning of the final and middle wheels. Remember last week we talked about the 3 Dharma wheels? The last 2 are primarily the Mahayana wheels, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras and the second wheel turning, and then the additional Mahayana scriptures that Buddha nature was taught in, as well as the mind-only point of view in the 3rd wheel turning. That taste of nectar of the excellent Dharma, which, when experienced, confers the deathless state, meaning that we can attain the state of buddhahood when we are able to actually taste the Dharma in the way that it's presented. If we, in this time, when we have attained freedoms and opportunities so difficult to find, and when found greatly meaningful, are not thoroughly grounded in the basis of the temporary and ultimate aims of our next lives, highly desired by living beings and superior to the ways of the worldly elders, then striving for the gains of this life alone is like winnowing chaff when it contains no grain. Understand that this is not beyond the level of animal behavior, and strive to thoroughly extract the essence of your freedoms and endowments. So this in the next paragraph are Gyaltsab Je saying, folks, you have this incredible perfect human rebirth. You don't take advantage of it now and actually use it meaningfully rather than just being preoccupied with the pleasures of this life, you've lost this amazing opportunity. This is what this life is for, the purpose of this life. So then he goes on to say, follow in the tradition of those valid beings, wherein the paths that were traversed and will be traversed by the superiors of the 3 times, together with their fruit, were clearly laid out through an ocean of reasoning and scriptural citations. Understand that there is no other supreme method that pleases the Buddhas more than practicing these paths correctly by way of the 3 precious trainings. If we encapsulate all of what the Buddha taught, it comes down to 3 main trainings, which are the 3 baskets of the Buddha's teachings. Morality, which is the Vinaya basket. Concentration, which is called the Sutra basket, as a subset of the discourses of the Buddha. And then the Abhidharma, which is the training in higher wisdom. So those are essentially kind of, again, Gyaltsab Je saying, admonishing us, you all have this amazing opportunity. You need to take advantage of it now. Okay. Now we're going to go into a little bit of a discussion of a Sangha as a reliable guide, because again, there are, within the middle way point of view, you can look at a Sangha and what he did with the mind-only school is perhaps he didn't know what the middle way was all about. Perhaps he was mistaken in some way. But he's not a mistaken being at all. We have to have, again, this reliability in him. So I'm going to go through this paragraph and then I'll talk a little bit about, some of it is referring to things we talked about last week, the story of a Sangha and Maitreya. So it says, a Sangha previously went to great lengths and accumulated great roots of virtue with respect to many Buddhas. His intellectual acuteness was like no other, and he is still upheld by protector Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. He thoroughly fulfilled his prayers to take responsibility for the teachings of the Bhagawan, Buddha Shakyamuni, and was prophesied to give an exhaustive commentary on the intention of the interpretable and the definitive sutras. Such a person was aware that future disciples would be like lost travelers when reading the ocean of Mahayana sutras, finding it difficult to understand the connection from one sentence to the next, let alone understand the exceptionally profound meaning. He also knew that he himself was obscured with respect to the secret points of the Tathagata. We mentioned this last week, right? He wanted to discern the clear meaning, in particular of the Prajnaparamita. So he says he thought to himself, if I please the holy regent, Maitreya, who, through the teachings of the sage, is endowed with the eye that sees all secrets, then he will accomplish my wishes. A Sangha then engaged in practices which resulted in direct visions of Maitreya. Again, after 12 years of meditation in the cave and so on, he eventually had his vision of Maitreya. Through the Bhagawan's miraculous powers, he went to Tushita and listened to the Dharma, completely realizing the intentions of all scriptures for the sake of all future disciples on earth. He brought back the gift of Dharma in the form of these 5 treatises, the 2 differentiations, I mentioned these last week, the 2 ornaments, and the text we're studying, the Sublime Continuum of the Mahayana. In general, within the Bhagawan scriptures, there are 2 ways that definitive and interpretable meanings can be classified. There is the way set forth in the exposition of Arya Akshamati Sutra, the King of Concentration Sutra, among others. And then there's the way taught in the Sutra Illuminating the Thought. Those first 2 sutras are said to be a part of the second wheel turning because they elaborate on the perfection of wisdom. The third, the one that's mentioned here, is part of the third wheel turning, the Sutra Illuminating Thought. This was, again, what gave birth to a Sangha feeling the need to expound upon the mind-only tenets. As shown in the former set of sutras, a sutra that teaches all phenomena as empty of being established by way of their own characteristics is of definitive meaning. And a sutra teaching aggregates, persons, and so forth through a variety of words and phrases is of interpretable meaning. So what's being said here? Let me take it off screen for a moment. He's saying there are kind of 2 ways that the Buddha set out what we would be able to find out as what is definitive in the Buddha's teachings, meaning, again, we can rely upon it on face value as being the final word of the Buddha, and what we have to interpret. This is often called provisional teachings, teachings that were given by the Buddha that are not the final word, but they're useful nonetheless. It's not saying that there's no use to those, let's just pay attention to the definitive. Rather, we need both. In the Lam Rim, for example, all of you have studied the Lam Rim. The Lam Rim, almost all of it up until you get to the teachings on emptiness, is provisional. It helps us to practice the Dharma in a way that kind of complements the eventual realization of the wisdom of emptiness. We look at those 2 presentations that were given, again, where the Buddha said, this is definitive, this is interpretable, in those King of Concentration Sutras and so on, versus the Sutra Unraveling the Thought. In the first one, he said that things that teach emptiness of inherent existence are definitive by nature. Therefore, they can be relied upon as teaching the final word of the Buddha. Whereas everything else that doesn't teach ultimate truth, doesn't teach emptiness, is provisional, is interpretable. We don't rely upon it on face value. Now we're going to go on to talk about what the Sutra Unraveling the Thought teaches in regard to this same topic of what is definitive and what is interpretable. According to the Sutra Illuminating the Thought, thoroughly imputed phenomena do not exist by way of their own character, yet thoroughly established and other powered phenomena do exist by way of their own character. I don't want to do a full explanation of these, but recall when I think I mentioned this last week, when I introduced that third wheel turning, it's called the wheel turning of fine discrimination. Why? Because that was for the people who weren't quite ready for what the second wheel turning taught. To really get that things are empty of inherent existence means you have to go pretty far in what you're negating. So the Buddha came up with a sort of in-between view in that third wheel turning where he said, oh, there are some things that still do have inherent existence, but there are many phenomena that don't have it. And so in that way, he was satisfying those beings who weren't quite ready for what the second wheel turning taught, for the prajnaparamita. So then he says, continuing on our commentary, it says, therefore, a sutra generalizing that everything exists by way of its own character, or that nothing exists by way of its own character, is of interpretable meaning according to that presentation. Again, this isn't the final word of the Buddha according to Nagarjuna. I'm going to get to that on the next page. But nonetheless, this is the way that this sutra sets out what is interpretable. If it teaches like the perfection of wisdom, like the Heart Sutra, no form, no feeling, no, and so on, all these various things saying that none of them exist inherently, that's to be interpreted. It's not the final word of the Buddha according to this sutra, which teaches the mind-only view. So then it continues, a sutra that thoroughly distinguishes the boundaries between what is and is not established by way of its own character, was taught to be of definitive meaning, meaning that the Sutra Unraveling the Thought, other sutras in that third wheel turning that said, this is what is interpretable, this is what is definitive, those are what you can rely upon. And it sounds kind of weird because we have kind of the Buddha teaching two different things that seem to be contradictory or are contradictory. Over here, if it teaches emptiness of inherent existence, it's definitive. Over here, if it teaches that all things are empty of inherent existence, that's interpretable. This is why, once more, we have to treat the teachings like gold and discern this for ourselves. But we can rely upon those great masters, such as Nagarjuna, that have done the work themselves and can say, no, we can rely in the end upon this. Nonetheless, this is an important stepping stone. They often say that the mind-only view, I'm going to just talk about it very briefly because that's a whole nother course, the tenets course, where we go into more detail. According to the mind-only view, everything that is appearing to us as external to the mind, in other words, everything in this physical world around us, for example, all of that is arising from a karmic seed. And together with that karmic seed that gives rise to that external appearance is the internal awareness of that. We have a subjective and objective duality that is arising from a karmic seed in our minds that is not in accord with reality, according to the mind-only school. The external projection is not actually external, kind of like a dream. A dream is used as an example here in a very vivid way. Because when you're dreaming, you don't have the external objects there in the room with you while you're asleep, right? They're all in your own mind's eye. They're appearing and seem to be very real, but they don't have any external existence. In the same way, according to the mind only, everything that appears to us appears in that dualistic manner as external to the mind, internal awareness of that. But those two are arising from a seed in our minds and are purely internal. Mind only. Everything is arising within the sphere of mind. This is, again, not the final definition of emptiness. They would say, the mind-only school would say things are empty of existing in that independent, external way outside of the mind. Rather, they depend upon these factors of karmic seeds to give rise to that dualistic appearance. This, again, we can check out for ourselves, but the Buddha said this is a valuable thing for people who have strong attachment and adherence to the external world, to kind of think that it's like a dream, right? Well, these things are not real in the way that they appear. It's like a dream, and that this is just something my mind is coming up with through the force of karmic imprints. Bakchaks, as they're called in Tibetan. These imprints are giving that dualistic appearance. There's no reality to it. It is empty of that type of existence. Over here, in terms of the Madhyamika, middle way view, it's that things have inherent existence, meaning that there are external objects, and there are a variety of objects, everything that exists. None of them exist from their own side, by way of their own nature. And we'll be talking about this more. These are, again, setting out right from the beginning of this text that you will find in the Mahayana teachings two different presentations of emptiness, and hence two different ways of looking at what is definitive and what is interpretable in the Buddha's teachings in those two wheel turnings. The second wheel turning that taught the middle way view, the third wheel turning that taught the mind-only view. So it's, again, up to us to discern that, but as I said, we can certainly rely upon beings who have come before us who have discerned this truth for themselves. So that's where we go to now. Following the former of these sutras, the first presentation of the middle way, the protector Nagarjuna excellently opened the charioteer's way of distinguishing between interpretable and definitive meaning, and thereby effortlessly proved that the latter sutra, the sutra illuminating the thought, is of interpretable meaning. It's a provisional sutra for those beings who are inclined to the mind-only view, who need that type of view to let go of their strong adherence to external objects and so on. The Master Arya Asanga opened the tradition of the mind-only school by following Maitreya's two differentiations and the ornament for Mahayana Sutras, three of the texts that Maitreya gave to him, right? And by relying on the method of differentiating interpretable and definitive meaning outlined in the Sutra Illuminating the Thought. He also authored commentaries on the intention of the smaller vehicle baskets. So again, he did a lot of work to kind of do all of this. Let me just read, I'm going to skip a few paragraphs here because this gets into kind of what those various texts that were mentioned, what they teach, how they teach things. What I want to do is go down to where we actually talk about the text that we're studying. Whoops, I may have gone too far. The emptiness taught, this is page 4, the emptiness taught in the Sublime Continuum, the text we're studying, is the ultimate reality, free from all elaborations, the emptiness of true or inherent existence of all phenomena. It is the object of observation of the path that must be realized to achieve even the enlightenment of hearers and solitary realizers. Again, hearers and solitary realizers, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, many of you know this terminology. Those are the followers of the fundamental vehicle that are striving for their own liberation alone, their own personal nirvana. What we're mostly talking about are Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who want to become fully enlightened, but we need to teach a path for those who simply want to be free from their own state of suffering, their own samsaric existence. So it is taught without, and just to reiterate what it says here, you even have to realize this emptiness of inherent existence to attain their goal, which is the goal of becoming an arhat, a foe destroyer. It is taught without difference to the emptiness proclaimed in the extensive, middling, and condensed Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, again in the second wheel turning, and without difference to that in the Tathagata Essence Sutra. This emptiness, taught as the main topic in the Sublime Continuum, was clarified in Master Asanga's commentary according to the intention of Maitreya. So what we're kind of getting at in regard to this passage, just to kind of get to the point. The point is that although Asanga did delineate the mind-only path, it was done for a purpose, to be able to help those beings that had some proclivity for that, some intention to learn from that and generate realizations from that. It was not done as the final word of the Buddha, but Asanga himself had absolute clarity with regard to the middle way. They even say in some texts that he taught this for his brother Vasubandhu. Remember I mentioned last week there were two brothers, Sangha and Vasubandhu, born from different fathers. They were stepbrothers. But essentially, his brother was tending towards the fundamental vehicle. And so he wanted to teach a Mahayana path that he thought his brother could appreciate. The Buddha had given these teachings, so he elaborated on the mind only as a mechanism to help his brother Vasubandhu. Looks like there is one question from the Zoom room. Let me go ahead and take that one, and I'll take a little break there and drink some tea. Karen, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, just a quick question. Where does Tantra fit in all this? Is that essentially like the fourth wheel turning, or it's apples and oranges, a completely separate path? I'm just a little confused. I understand the progression, but and then we get to that. So I just need you to clarify a little bit.
Sure. Thank you, Karen. Yeah, when we talk about these three wheel turnings, we are talking about the way in which the sutra presentation was given. When we use this sort of capital S Sutra and capital T Tantra, we're talking about two branches of the Mahayana. The Mahayana is the vehicle, again, for achieving Buddhahood. The Sutra path does teach all the various steps, the 6 perfections and so on that are essential to becoming enlightened. But Tantra goes further and gives us more esoteric methods to be able to become enlightened more quickly. The Tantric teachings weren't said to be part of a separate wheel turning, but they were taught by the Buddha, oftentimes in the form of Vajradhara, this sort of primordial Tantric being, only to, again, select disciples, bodhisattvas, who were ready for that level of teaching. So the Buddha did teach the Tantras. There are discourses of the Buddha that are called the Tantras, where he goes into these esoteric practices and how to accomplish enlightenment in that mode. But they are not said to be kind of in a separate wheel turning. They're an extension of what the Buddha taught in terms of the Mahayana, the second and third wheel turning, and they rely heavily upon them. You don't practice the path of Tantra without the foundation of Sutra. It's meaningless. It doesn't have any purpose. We have to have the foundation of Sutra, and on the basis of that, incorporate the Tantric practices to become a Buddha even more quickly. So that's, in essence, what is taught. Now, again, in some of the books, particularly the one that I mentioned earlier, this nice book by His Holiness and Venerable Chodron, they do give a presentation of Buddha nature from a tantric point of view, because that's when we start talking about not just this subtlemost mind that we call the clear light mind, but also the subtlemost wind energy that goes with that clear light mind.
Right.
And those being what constitute Buddha nature, because that's both elements that we end up developing completely, not just the mental component, but even the physical component of those wind energies that allow you to have a form body of a Buddha. So it's not until we get to Tantra where we see the full presentation of what's entailed in Buddha nature. I won't be touching on it quite so much here because this entire presentation is being done from the sutra, capital S sutra point of view, rather than the tantric view. So again, you might read His Holiness. By the way, I'll mention this now. I've decided that at the end of each, or for each class, I'm also going to put a list of just some supplemental materials. There's not one text that I can point you to and say, this is a good book to follow the entire course. But there will be some topics where you might benefit from, for example, the presentation on Buddha nature in this book, the presentation on the 3 jewels in one of the other volumes, and so on. So just know that I'm going to do that for each session where there are supplemental materials. So you can go to those, and if you have those books available, you can read a little bit more. All right. I hope that answers your question.
Well, can you hear me or no?
Yes.
Oh, just a quick thing. Was Nagarjuna a tantric practitioner? Do all his writings essentially stem from that body of beliefs?
Well, he was a tantric practitioner. He actually even wrote a commentary on Guhya Samaja practice. And I may have even written other tantric commentaries. But again, they tended to write separately. You write the sutra presentations for those inclined to the sutra, and the tantric presentations for those who are engaged in that level of practice. And again, the sutra foundation for the tantric teachings is going to be the same. But so again, you do have the same being teaching in different ways. It's just like the Buddha wasn't teaching Tantra when he taught the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. That's the emptiness we need to incorporate into our tantric practice, the view of ultimate truth. But nonetheless, the Buddha taught Tantra separately. Does that get at what you were talking about, Karen?
Yeah, no, you've clarified a lot for me. Thanks.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Oh, you clarified a lot for me. So thanks.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right, good. Thank you. Okay. All right, let's carry on then. So essentially, I'm going to finish up this introductory section really quickly because the rest of this page, I don't think I'm even going to be commenting on. I'll just kind of give a summary of what's here. Again, when we look at this presentation, this is about achieving the resultant Buddha jewel. So in that context, we're looking at things from what supports our Mahayana practice. And so someone might think, well, but what is the real intention? Because we also have those other people who are practicing the Hinayana path, the fundamental vehicle path, and they have their own goal. Well, the final goal for all beings is enlightenment. That's why we all have Buddha nature. We all are eventually going to become enlightened. So again, it's good to understand Buddha nature as a support for achieving the goal of arhatship, attaining that, but that's not the final goal. The final goal for all beings will be to become a Buddha. We all have Buddha nature. That is your final destination. Wanted to kind of keep going on the text, but I do want to mention something because I overheard it in the discussion last week. Venerable Rabina, when she talks about Buddha nature, she often uses the example of an acorn, right? Many of you know this, you've heard this first say this. If you talk about an acorn, you could use an acorn for a lot of different things, right? Children might have a basket of them that they paint little faces on. They've got the little hat already. Maybe they decorate the hat, You could do that with an acorn, right? Perfectly fine. You could have a little display of a bowl of them that's kind of a centerpiece on your table. You could shoot them at other people, get a slingshot, and probably injure somebody with an acorn if you wanted to be malicious. What is the nature of an acorn, though? What is its potential? It's to become an oak tree. That kind of, again, points to this developmental lineage, this developmental Buddha nature. Our sort of deepest kind of substance within us is Buddhahood. It's just it has to be developed, just like an acorn needs to be put into the ground and watered and get enough sunlight and what have you, so that it can eventually become that oak tree. The emptiness of the acorn is what allows it to become an oak tree. If it was inherently an acorn, it could never transform into an oak tree. That's the naturally abiding lineage. What allows you to develop your mind into Buddhahood is the naturally abiding lineage of Buddha nature. That fact that your mind is empty of inherent existence is what will allow transformation to occur. Okay. So I just wanted to mention that before we get too far in this. So again, all beings will eventually go through that process of awakening their Buddha nature and actualizing it. Now we get into this, I might mention that this whole text is set out in what are called hierarchical outlines. Sometimes some of it is missing though, because it gets to be quite long if you include all of them. So we see that there are kind of four main parts. There's the meaning of the title, the translator's homage, the meaning of the text, that's the bulk of it, and then the meaning of the end. So we're going to first go into these, then you'll see like you'll have one meaning of the title, it's divided into A and B. And then if there's divisions of those, it'll go into 1 and 2 again, so that you essentially end up with this kind of hierarchy, everything kind of taking you further and further into these various topics. We talked about the title last week. The title in Sanskrit is the Mahayana Tantra Shastra. In Tibetan, Tekpa Chenpo Gyu Lame Tencha. And so again, I talked about this briefly, gave a kind of loose translation. It's right there in the English, the great vehicle treatise on the Sublime Continuum. Let's look at how this is actually set out in terms of the words. The Sanskrit Maha is Chenpo in Tibetan, means great. Yana is Tekpa, that means path or vehicle. Anuttara or Uttara is Lama. Tantra is Gyu. And again, Tantra is used here, but it's not referring to capital T Tantra. It's referring to Tantra as continuum. And Shastra is Tencha. So let's look at this explained individually. Here, yana or vehicle can be understood as the causal vehicle, that by which we traverse, or the resultant vehicle, the state to which we traverse. And we even are going to talk about tonight this idea of causal versus resultant refuge. When we take refuge, we often are taking refuge in those things that are outside of us that are causes to help us, just like those last three diamond topics, vajra topics, the Buddhas and other beings that we rely upon to help us on our path. But we also can talk about resultant refuge, which is when we take refuge in our own future Buddhahood, our own future enlightenment, which doesn't exist in the moment, but it does exist. Every one of you will eventually become a Buddha. That is your birthright. That's your acorn nature, is to become this oak tree. So your nature is to become a Buddha eventually. The vehicle is great, Maha, because it possesses the 7 great observations, observation of the extremely vast sutra collections and so forth. Let me take it off here and just go to the slides really quickly. I just have a little slide recap of these 7 greatnesses. You can find in the materials that I'm sending you a link to a page where you can go into a little more detail. The great object of focus, kind of what the Mahayana practitioner takes in, which is much more vast and profound than on the fundamental vehicle. The great practice of the 6 perfections and so on. The great wisdom, realizing the emptiness of both persons and phenomena. Great diligence or effort. Great skill and means in being able to help other beings. Those 5 qualities are distinguished from the perspective of the vehicle as a path that is the means for journeying on the path to enlightenment. It also is great in terms of the result, great perfect accomplishment. When you've attained the completion of the Mahayana path, it's a much greater accomplishment than that of the fundamental vehicle. It takes much more energy, merit, and so on to accomplish it, and you have removed all obscurations. Therefore, you have the 7th great quality, great enlightened activities. When you become an arhat, you sort of check out of samsara and abide in that space until you're brought back into the path to accomplish the goal of Buddhahood. You don't do anything for other beings in that state once you have passed away from existence and into the state of solitary peace, nirvana. So the last 2 qualities are established from the perspective of the vehicle as fruition. That is the destination, the goal we want to accomplish. And in that state of Buddhahood, then you can accomplish so much more for other beings. Let's go back to the text. I just wanted to at least give you a little commentary on that so you know what those 7 great observations are. Now we go into continuum. Again, this was Tantra in the Sanskrit. This refers to a continuation, a great scripture that teaches ways to purify a mind with defilements, which has had continuity since beginningless time. This again is this thread of kind of continuous subjective awareness that goes back without any beginning that has always had defilement, but those defilements are not inherent to the mind. And so as it says here then, a great scripture that teaches ways to purify that mind with defilements is kind of what we're referring to here as well then, is the scriptures themselves that allow that continuity of awareness to be purified. That's why it's being called sublime. This has another meaning of latter. Therefore, if we combine those, Sublime Continuum, this is a treatise which comments on the intentions of the latter scriptures of the Mahayana. So it's like that's the kind of raw stuff, but what we're referring to as the Sublime Continuum in its very essence is our minds that can be affected by those teachings, that can be developed by those teachings into the state of Buddhahood. All right? All right, then the final part within the word Shastra, Shas literally means to correct, and Tra to protect. The word mantra, for example, means to protect the mind. Man meaning mind, and Tra to protect. Shastra together, in brief, has the meaning of correcting the enemy of the afflictions and to protect from the frights of the lower realms and of existence itself, samsara. Okay, brief description of the title of the text. Kind of nice, he gives us that. Probably won't revisit it again. Then we have the translator's homage. We're already in the second section of this text. I prostrate to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. This is written by the translator to accomplish temporary and ultimate aims. From the perspective of the stages of the path, it shows refuge, whose meaning we must recollect during all explanations of Dharma and so forth. That's why we always recite the refuge formula before we begin teachings. We recall that our real refuge, our safe direction, is in the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in particular, as the Mahayana refuge, but also all the other objects of refuge that support us on our path. So this is how we get now into the meaning of the text. As I said, this is almost the entirety of the text. We won't even really get to the kind of final conclusion because, again, we're only studying chapter 1. Now we have it divided into an overview of the body of the text and then the extensive elaboration. All right, the overview of the body of the text. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because we already looked at the 7 vajra points earlier tonight. Each of these two, it says, should be understood from an ultimate and conventional perspective, as is on your chart and that I went through earlier. The ultimate Buddha is the Dharmakaya, the truth body, the truth body, which is by nature the excellent abandonments, again, the complete purification, and the exalted wisdoms, the complete development of the qualities. The conventional Buddha is the form body of the Buddha. The ultimate Dharma jewels are the true paths and true cessations in the continuum of a Mahayana practitioner. The conventional Dharmas are the collection of excellent discourses of the Buddha. And we need that temporary or conventional Dharma jewel to get us to understand the teachings. The ultimate assemblies or Sanghas are the knowers and states of liberation, the true paths and true cessations that exist in the continuum of Mahayana Arya beings. The conventional Sangha is the assembly of Mahayana Aryas, and I won't be saying much more on most of these. The ultimate basic element or Buddha nature is suchness, emptiness with defilement. The emptiness of the mind that is together with stains, defilement. The emptiness of a sentient being's mind. Remember, sentient being is everything up to Buddhahood. There's always some subtle level of defilement or obscuration there until you become a Buddha and it's fully removed. The conventional basic element is that factor of being a potential to suitably generate supramundane phenomena that exists in the mind of sentient beings. Now, we also generate phenomena prior to that supramundane mind that allows you to know that supramundane means a direct realization of emptiness and above, things that are going to take you beyond the mundane, beyond the world. Obviously, we need a lot to get there. Most of us are still trying to just collect the merit and wisdom and what have you to be able to eventually have that realization. Ultimate enlightenment, this is the 5th topic, is the Dharmakaya, and conventional enlightenment is the form body of a Buddha. As it says in one of the later root verses, the ultimate body is the abode of fulfillment of oneself. The conventional body of the seer is the abode of excellence for others. As it says, this is explained further on. Some may wonder, before we go on to the next topic, what then is the difference between Buddha and enlightenment in this context? Indeed, the ultimate and conventional aspects of enlightenment are the same as those of the Buddha jewel, as we saw if you look at the chart that we went through, right? And what we just talked about in the text. The difference lies in how they are presented. The former, the Buddha jewel, is that which will arise in one's own continuum, right? That's how we looked at it in terms of the 7 topics. The first 3 jewels are the object of intent, what we're trying to accomplish, your own enlightenment, your own state of being a Buddha jewel. The latter is that already established in the continuum of others, those beings who are already enlightened, who act as a cooperative condition to our becoming a Buddha. Now we go to the 6th topic. Ultimate qualities are the 32 qualities of separation through cessation, the powers and so forth, having, accomplished the full cessation of all of the obscurations in the mind. You then have these qualities present in the mind. The conventional are the 32 qualities of fruition, the 32 marks of a Buddha. Ultimate enlightened activities are the exalted wisdoms, the Dharmakaya, that accomplish those activities. The conventional are the collection of excellent discourses that the Buddhas give. Again, this is what Buddhas do. They have an enlightened mind, and from that enlightened mind, they give the Dharma. These are the activities, the 7th vajra topic, vajra point. Go through this rather quickly. Again, it's just kind of re-explaining it and saying, this is why we need all 7 of these, but more than 7 would be superfluous. More than 7 points would be unnecessary, and less than that would not suffice, as the cause and effect relationship is fulfilled by exactly these 7. The great Lama Lotsawa gave 2 explanations for this. One from the perspective of the wheel of non-abiding nirvana, and another from the perspective of the wheel of jewels. Again, these are kind of the same thing they're explaining, just slightly different perspectives. The former is an explanation based on a literal rendering of the verses from Maitreya that show the order of the 7 points. I believe, though, Gyaltsab says, that the main meaning of the text corresponds with the latter explanation of the wheel of jewels. In this explanation, the ultimate 3 jewels are one's resultant object of attainment and consist precisely of the 2 excellent aims, the aim of oneself and the aim of fulfilling the welfare of others. I will explain the reasons establishing this further on. Again, not so important. Just know that this is him justifying why the text is being set out this way. If you take it quite literally, you might say, well, first there are the causes, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha outside of ourselves, the resultant refuges that then awaken our Buddha nature, that then cause us to attain enlightenment, have the qualities, and engage in activities. And you could look at it logically that way. There's no problem. But the interpretation is meant to be the opposite, that we first look at the goal we want to achieve, our own future Buddhahood, becoming the 3 jewels ourselves, and so on. There are also 2 kinds of causes for establishing the 3 resultant jewels. We saw this when we looked at the chart, the substantial causes and cooperative conditions. The first is the basic element, Buddha nature, the suchness with defilement in the mind of a sentient being. If the basic element were not naturally pure, it didn't have any inherent, if it had inherent existence, in other words, purification of adventitious defilements would be untenable because they would be inherent to the mind. This indispensable reason for enlightenment is a substantial cause merely by name, as I mentioned earlier. Emptiness isn't the cause of anything, and it's not an actual generating cause. The lineage transformed through achievement is a generating cause. It is a functioning thing. It changes over time. Our minds that have the potential to achieve Buddhahood are constantly changing and can be developed. That's our developmental lineage or Buddha nature. And again, the cooperative conditions are the last 3: enlightenment, qualities, and activities in the continuum of others. Through other beings becoming fully enlightened and excellently turning the wheel of Dharma, we ourselves are able to completely purify the defilements within our own continuum. Therefore, merely those 3 are the required outer conditions. So again, we could certainly, continue here and look at the bottom here. It's just simply talking about how these are not the only qualities or things, obviously, that we need as external conditions. It's just highlighting them as the most important. If you do not have contact with the enlightened beings and their teachings, it's impossible for you to generate the path on your own, right? I'm going to skip over that and go to the next page where it says then, furthermore, The arising of the ultimate three jewels in our own continuum is through meditating on the correct view, which itself arises based on two causes and conditions. The two causes are our own basic element, your own Buddha nature, and the correct mental attention that allows you to attend to and practice the Buddha's teachings. The two conditions are the enlightenment and so forth of previous Tathagatas and the sounds, the teachings of others. The sounds of others are included within enlightened activities. So again, we do depend upon other things besides just those external factors. We also depend upon our own mindfulness and concentration and ability to discern things through our discrimination and wisdom. I'm going to skip this dispelling doubts. In almost every one of the sections when we talk about dispelling doubts, it just gets a little too complicated. This is going to take me over to the next page, page 9 of this introductory section, this overview of the body of the text. We have our first root verse, and we're only going to get 2 lines of it. First, verse 1 says, Buddha, Dharma, assembly. It's always, again, the translation for Sangha. Sometimes we use the word supreme assembly. Basic element, that's the Buddha nature. Enlightenment, excellent qualities. And finally, enlightened activities. So this passage reveals that which is a Buddha included within the 3 Buddha bodies. Dharma jewels included within true paths and true cessations. The assembly of Mahayana superiors, the Sangha jewels. These 3, the 3 resultant jewels, show us our temporary and ultimate objects of refuge. The following 4 are treated as their causes: the Tathagata essence, the basic element, which includes, once more, the suchness with defilement, the emptiness of the mind that's with stains, and the potential that exists in sentient beings' minds to produce these amazing supramundane qualities. Secondly, the enlightenment that consists of the ultimate transformation of exalted wisdom and abandonments. Again, this would be in another being who we have some sort of contact with, the qualities of separation and fruition relating to their enlightenment, and the enlightened activities of those perfect, complete Buddhas, those beings. All right. Then on the other hand, if you take it in reverse, like I was explained earlier, that you could possibly say the 3 jewels are in the minds of others or accomplished by others. We come into contact with them as external factors. Therefore, our Buddha nature is awakened. Therefore, we go on to achieve enlightenment and so on. You know, there's no problem with that, as he says here. And it says here, we find such a presentation to be only reasonably applicable in the discussion of the order of the 7 points later on. Whichever the case, though, the basic element, the Buddha nature, can only ever be explained in the context of a cause, and taking it to be a final result demonstrates incompetence with regard to the explanation in a Sangha's treatise. Buddha nature ceases at the moment you become a Buddha. It is a cause that leads to the final result. You do not have Buddha nature when you become a Buddha. You have fully developed your mind. The emptiness of the mind with defilements becomes the emptiness of the mind without defilements. That emptiness carries on as the emptiness of the mind, but the mind has substantially changed. Therefore, Buddha nature no longer exists because you've accomplished Buddhahood. All right, then we have a brief little enumeration of the 7. I'll go through this quickly. This is the latter part of verse 1. The body of the entire treatise is condensed into these 7 vajra points. If we summarize the subject matter of this treatise, it can be reduced to 7 objects of realization, and the words of the treatise itself can be condensed into the 7 vajra-like points of realization. Alternatively, if we summarize all the citations connecting these 7 points back to the questions of King Dharaneshvari's Sutra, they can be condensed into these 7. I mentioned earlier that the topic of the Tathagata essence, or Buddha nature, is from the Tathagata Garbha Sutra, which was in the 3rd wheel turning. But there's another sutra that is the basis for this presentation of these 7 vajra points. And that's the one that was mentioned here, the King Dharaneshvara Sutra, which is going to be mentioned in the very next section that we're going to go into. I'm just going to go for just a little bit longer. I would like to maybe even start the topic of the Buddha jewel. So hang in there. You're going to get a short break in a sense in a moment and then we can do a little bit of discussion, all right? Okay. So on the next page, it says the 7, let me see, make sure that I'm going to skip a whole bunch of this. because otherwise we're going to end up like getting lost in the, I'm going to go all the way to page 16, which I think is actually a little later than that in this. Yeah. There it is. Okay. This is, again, page 16 of your text. It's page 20 in the file. And because the first few pages of the PDF file are not enumerated in the page numbers that I'm giving you. In brief, these 7 vajra points should be known as the body of those excellent discourses of the Buddha previously cited, and those that come later, and the body of the entire treatise that comments on the intention of those. The condensing of these into the body of the text is as follows. The teachings in this context are those excellent discourses and this commentarial treatise. The gateway to those are the entrance to the text, the vajra points that have been summarized into 7, and therefore the body of the text is that which by nature summarizes those. The very first verse itself is the actual presentation of the body of the text. However, because I think there's no contradiction in including the following 2 verses, regarding connections to scripture and definite enumeration. So this is still considered part of the overview of the body of the text. Verse 2, these 7 are presented by way of their characteristics and order, following the questions of King Dharma Sutra. The first 3 points should be known from the introduction, and the latter 4 points from the divisions of the intelligent ones and the victors. So this is how those 7 are traced back into that sutra, which again is said to be one of the primary sources for the presentation in the Uttara Tantra in its entirety. Regarding the doubt as to whether this treatise on the 7 points is unfounded or whether it sources itself somewhere, this text abandons the fault of self-fabrication. This isn't something a Sangha made up, right? Because the 7 Vajra-like points were taught in the Dharanishvara Sutra, the Raja Sutra. I missed the Raja part of it. That means the king, Dharanishvari Sutra. The sutra teaches the unique nature of the Buddhas and so forth, and thereby presents the 7 by way of their characteristics. The words teach in a linear order, consecutively and in a continuous manner. The order taught in the root verses is in the same fashion. And this is pretty basic stuff, just essentially saying this is what we find in the text, same order as that presentation. Regarding which words of the sutra teach which points, again, I don't need to go through all this in detail. It's just saying that you will find those topics back in that sutra if you were to go back to that sutra, which is probably in the collection of the Kangyur that we have here, if you know Tibetan and can do that and find the scriptures. Now we're going to skip forward again because there's a longer presentation on this and a lot of little disputes and debates. We're going to go all the way forward to page 30 of our text, which I'm guessing again is about 34. Yeah. We're going to go to the bottom of page 30 as it's delineated here. The summary. In this way, as explained before, the 7 Vajra points should be understood in detail by way of the teaching of their specific characteristics, their uncommon nature, according to the Dharanishvara Raja Sutra. Okay. And in terms of them being definite in order, we have one more verse. And this is again giving us the causal relationship that we already looked at. From Buddha, the Dharma, from the Dharma, the assembly of Aryas, from the assembly, the Tathagata essence, exalted wisdom is attained upon the ending of the element. Attainment of this exalted wisdom is attaining supreme enlightenment, endowed with attributes of powers and so forth that can bring the welfare of all sentient beings. So again, when we finally accomplish our Buddha jewel from a Buddha jewel, what comes forward? The Dharma jewel, the teachings. What comes forward from the Dharma jewel is the Sangha. Sangha are created through the force of the Dharma jewel. And this is what will help beings to awaken their own Buddha nature. And then again, enlightenment and so forth, all these various qualities ensue. So what is the connection between these 7 points to be realized wherein there is a definite order of one following the other by nature? First, from manifesting perfect and complete awakening, the Buddha jewel, with respect to all aspects of all phenomena, the wheel of Dharma is turned for Arya beings. This is what we're trying to accomplish, right? We want to become a Buddha so we can turn the wheel of Dharma for others. Then, from excellently turning the wheel of Dharma, there arises the assembly of Arya Sangha jewels. and an assembly of Aryas comes to surround the trainees. Attaining manifest and complete enlightenment oneself, and then excellently turning the wheel of Dharma is the observed object of the bodhicitta that exists in the continuum of the intended trainees of the Sublime Continuum. This is again what we're intending to attain, is our own enlightenment as a Buddha jewel, to teach the Dharma and to create a Sangha through those beings that realize the Dharma in their own minds. An arising of the assembly of Aryas based on that is the object. I already said that. The meaning of the Tathagata essence, this fourth topic, arising from an assembly of Aryas, is as follows. When one strives for the final three jewels, and the three jewels that are close causes of one's object of attainment, and one also strives for an Arya assembly that results from oneself turning the wheel of Dharma after becoming a Buddha, at that point, the wish arises to purify one's own Tathagata essence of stains. And in dependence upon that, a Tathagata essence purified of the appropriate defilements arises. So again, this is why what sets us on our track is when we look at the three jewels as an object of intent, what we want to attain, and then we decide that we are going to move in that direction, develop the great compassion and so on that strives to become a Buddha for the sake of others. This is what I mentioned earlier. For how long then does the Tathagata essence exist? Until one has attained the exalted wisdom of a Buddha, completely free from stains. Up until that point, the suchness with defilement and a sentient being's receptivity to the enlightened activities of a Buddha and the lineage are all known as the Tathagata essence. However, once that exalted wisdom has been attained, it is no longer called the Tathagata essence. Those of inferior knowledge may assert that the Tathagata essence, as taught in the sutra, also exists at the time of the final result. But understand that this has been refuted and laid to rest. Taking the perspective of the second explanation style from the, this just goes into, again, you could explain it the opposite way, as I already talked about earlier. So let's skip over that. And again, we have this idea of the object of attainment known as supreme enlightenment is the attainment of the exalted wisdom of a Buddha, where we have exhausted all defilements, purified our minds. The qualities such as the 10 powers, the 4 fearlessnesses, the 18 unique or unshared qualities of a Buddha are taught as attributes of enlightenment. Through possessing such qualities, one is able to enact the welfare of sentient beings, both spontaneously and in an endless stream. This is the enlightened activity. It's taught as an attribute of the quality. So again, those last three, the enlightenment of other beings, the qualities they possess, and the activities they engage in of teaching the Dharma, are what we need to rely upon in order to become Buddhas ourselves. That's the introduction. That's this overview of the text. Now we get into the branches. This is where, again, I'm just going to have to not get as far as I had hoped tonight. Next week, we'll cover the Buddha jewel. Maybe we can even cover the other 2 jewels. We'll see. Know that if you do decide that you want to print out this commentary that you all have access to, it's quite a few pages, and there will be some sections where I skip. But after we get through the 3 jewels, I won't be skipping quite as much, I'm hoping I can go through most of the commentary. But know that we're going to kind of abbreviate this first part quite a bit. I might mention that even when the basic program, some teachers of the basic program, when they teach this course, they don't go into these first 3 topics of the 3 jewels. I want to teach on every one of the verses, but I'm only going to teach very succinctly and briefly. I don't want to go through pages and pages of commentary, because I think we lose sight of the main goal again, which is to teach on the Buddha nature, Buddha lineage, all right? So just know that that's my plan, but feel free to print these out if you find it's easier to work with a hard copy of things and know where I'm at and what I'm doing. I would appreciate feedback as well from those online. Is it too much, or even in the Gompa, to have the commentary up on the screen in front of you and me reading it? Normally, we all have it in front of ourselves and are reading it, but I notice even tonight that most people here don't have it, and it's a little difficult sometimes to be doing that. So let me know when you come back after the discussion whether or not this format is working for you as well. That might be helpful for me, because I don't want to do things that everyone's going to be checking out and just saying, no, that doesn't work for me. But at the same time, this is the mode of these basic program courses, is to go through a commentary together so that we understand the verses in much more detail and have a richer meaning that we're cultivating. Tonight, what I'd like you to do is work with the one question that was remaining from last week. I had a second question regarding the Buddha jewel, which obviously we didn't get to. Let me put that on screen. And we're going to be dividing the Zoom folks into breakout groups so that you then can discuss this question together. It's essentially to go over, see if I can get it up here on screen. No, that's the Buddha Jewel one. Go over one more. Oops, no, that's not it either. I hate this when Zoom does, or my, it is essentially Zoom doing this. I can't get over to my things because on my screen, you can't see it. I have a little menu thing up there. Let me try to get it up here on the screen. I don't think it's going to. I might have to like just get out of other things. I'm not going to be using that again. So we get out of that, get out of that. Here we go. This is actually the readings that you have. I just want to introduce this to you briefly so that you know that I again have given you some things in regard to the 3 jewels here. We didn't get to the Buddha jewel, but you could read this in advance of next week if you have that text. Let me get the questions up here. I'm not getting the questions. This is so weird. That I can't get rid of. Move that over here. Crazy. I don't know if any of you have ever hosted a meeting and you know that what goes on here, but when you're showing something, it's like it's almost impossible. What had happened to it? I'm going to read it to you and then I'll find it and put it on screen. The question from last week is essentially regarding the 7 vajra points of the Sublime Continuum. What are the individual topics and how are they presented in terms of conventional and ultimate? What are the relationships among them? But again, just kind of review over it, but make it a very loose discussion. I don't want you to necessarily just read them. Just come up with your own words to explain each of these, all right? And let me get it on screen and then I'll share that with everyone before we go. So essentially just to go over those 7 vajra points. Any questions? What I would encourage you to do is do this for about, let's say 20 minutes. So it'll be roughly 8 minutes, 2 or so. And then we'll come back into the big space here, see what questions people have, and then do our dedication prayers, all right? Those in the Gompa here, break out into some small groups, maybe like 3 or 4 people, and just go through these 7 vajra points and help each other to kind of come up with descriptions, what they are, the relationship among them, all right? Okay. I'll get this on here. I don't know what happened to it. There it is. Okay. Okay, now I've got to move it again because of this. There's the question. It's as low as I can go. Are there any questions from the folks online or in the Gompa that came out of your discussion? No. I realize that right now, I mean, these topics are just kind of pretty factual and just looking at it, but I do want people to, again, begin to see the relationships between things as we start building on some of the things about Buddha nature in particular, that's where it will become juicier, I hope, for all of you. Yes, Jane, please unmute yourself.
Yeah. I'm having, because I don't really process what I'm taking in during your lecture and with my note taking, and I find it difficult to actually address the question that deals with this class. I think I might find it helpful to have the questions refer to the previous class when I've had a chance to actually integrate what we went over. I don't know what other people's experience are, but that's what's happening for me.
In some classes that I teach, people do a discussion prior to me coming in that is of the previous week. So they've had a week to digest. And then, for example, I mean, I'm not suggesting this necessarily, but then from like 7 to 7:30, people would be digesting the material with the discussion. And then I would come in at 7:30 and teach the new class that would go till 9 o'clock. And then the following week would be the same. You'd be discussing what I taught the week before. I do hear that from folks, and I appreciate you sharing that, Jane, that it is kind of hard to digest that evening's teachings right away and to be able to talk about them. I think it's really, again, one that may be hard to reconcile depending on who we all have participating. If it gets to be where people would prefer that we discuss either before or after, but discuss the previous week's topics, that's fine with me. It's really up to all of you as long as there's some discussion. Is there any other reflection on that from anyone else in the Zoom room or otherwise here? Photo? No?
I do find the question helpful.
You didn't? I'm sorry.
No, I do.
You do. Okay.
So just, I don't know how the discussion before class would go, if it was just a free-form discussion, or if it would have a question like this.
Oh, it would still have a question. Yeah. Yeah, it would still have a question. Essentially what it would be is what I'm calling the discussion group question / homework. I would have that for that class that you would then be able to work with over that week. You'd come in at the beginning of the class or whatever prepared to discuss that question. And so you would have additional time to digest the material. If that's the preference, if we want to try it, of course, it means that this week you're going to be discussing something that you already discussed, but some of you, again, might like having another week to digest it. Do you have some comment on that, Sean, or is this a different question?
Different question, but if we have time, I know it's already 11. So.
What? I'm sorry, what was the last part?
Well, I have a different question, but if we have time, because I know it's already.
And just hold on 1 second. Are there any other reflections? How do we want to deal with resolving this? Yeah, Phyllis. Okay. Why don't we continue to start with me, and then what we'll do next week is we'll do the question that we did tonight, and maybe like there'll be an extra question for those who might feel like they want to move into that, or if you exhaust that question and want to have an additional question. I did have 2 questions for tonight. Again, the second one was on the Buddha jewel, and I didn't get to that material. So what I'll do is I'll still provide some questions for the following week that will be based on next week's lecture. And then you will discuss those in 2 weeks from tonight. So next week, the question we did tonight, and there will also be the option of a question on the Buddha jewel, and then we'll carry on. Yeah, Aida, was this on the topic of the Q&A or the discussion?
Yes, actually, I could not mute myself before, but I'm okay with this format. What I have been able to do, if you find the time, of course, is do the homework before the class. And that clarifies a lot for me. And I answer the questions so that, I'm ready for the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, it can be hard, though, for some people who don't have the opportunity to devote some time, because I usually wouldn't have the questions until the day before. And so, I don't know, I mean, it gets to be difficult if you're going to be lectured on something to have enough previous study to be able to discuss. I'm not sure. I think it gets to be tricky. Let's plan for next week to be like I'm talking about. We'll get together, do the lecture for an hour and a half, and then we'll discuss some of what we did tonight. Sean, please go ahead and give me your question. And if we don't have time to answer it tonight, I can take note of it and begin with that next week.
I was just wondering if you could expound a little more on, is it just a failure of translation into English that the term Buddha nature is used when a Buddha, you said when you actually become a Buddha, the Buddha nature no longer exists. So it's not really a Buddha's nature.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and if we go to this term Tathagata or Tathagata essence or Tathagata Garba kind of literally has the meaning of sort of womb, like this is the place from which Tathagatas arise. Just like we say Buddha nature, there's this nature or lineage from which a Buddha arises. So at that point, there's a Buddha, but there's not Buddha lineage. There's not Buddha nature because it has kind of become the Buddha. The full transformation has occurred. And so in that way, it's just a matter of the term that we're using to refer to the potential that exists all the way up until it's potentialized is one term. Once it's potentialized, it becomes the thing that the potential is there for. It's Buddha nature up to this point, and then it becomes Buddha. Does it make some sense? Essentially, I mean, it's not just translation terms. It's a literal term that is different for the potential. Just like if we talked about a seed and a sprout. A seed has the potential to become a sprout given the proper conditions, right? It needs the substantial causes the seed itself, but it needs many other cooperative conditions. That seed, we could say, is a sprout potential, right? We could call it that. That's not what we usually do because we call it a seed. We give it this other name. But seed is also sprout potential. And once it has sprouted, it's no longer seed and no longer a sprout potential. It is the sprout. So that's the idea behind it taking a different name when we have, or no longer existing even when we have the end product of Buddhahood being attained. Does that make some sense, Sean? Yeah.
It does make sense. It just is a little confusing because it feels like you're saying it is the nature of a Buddha, but it's not.
Yeah. I mean, again, this translation of it as Buddha nature might be deceptive to
I mean,
some
the
degree.
womb idea probably works better
Yeah.
because
And
then
again,
it's
when I
something
put up
that's
the
born
slide
out of the
last,
womb.
yeah, when I put up the slide last week of the different names, I think another one was Buddha potential. You could call it Buddha potential. Maybe we should try using that term going forward, but it's the nature of what will be a Buddha. It's the potential of what will be a Buddha. That's, again, ways to look at it. I think we better close for tonight. Again, if you do have additional questions, write them down, send them to me. Send them to Venerable Dundrup. If you don't send them to me, he'll get them to me. But we'll deal with any other questions that we have from tonight when we get together next week. Let's do the prayers. And we're going to do the usual dedication prayers that are on the screen. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. And may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And we do this wonderful prayer that Rinpoche advises around His Holiness, having his wishes be fulfilled. And included in that is for him to have a very long, healthy life. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then making prayers for Rinpoche's swift return. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And let's dedicate very quickly for anyone that we're holding in our hearts right now. No doubt every one of us knows beings who are going through a difficult time, having obstacles, illness, or those who perhaps have died recently. Send this positive energy out to them so they are free of all their suffering immediately and have all the causes and conditions to become enlightened as quickly as possible. And may this be so for all beings through what we've done here tonight. All right, thank you all for your participation. We'll get all the kinks out of things and move forward, but I really appreciate the feedback. And again, if any of you have further feedback, please let Venerable Gundrick or myself know. Thanks so much. Be well. Have a good week.